Come, please. Sir, आ जाइए. Okay, sorry. Good afternoon, everyone. Our gratitude to the authors, Dr. Santosh, Mehrotra, Professor Jajati, Parida, for writing this wonderful book, India Out of Work, Rethinking India's Growth Story. Absolutely delighted to have with us eminent economists, Dr. Montek Singh Ahluwalia, Vice Chairman Planning Commission, former Vice Chairman Planning Commission, Dr. Rakesh Mohan, former Deputy Governor RBI, and now member of the Prime Minister's Economic Advisory Council. We are also grateful to Shareen Bhan, Managing Editor, CNBC TV 18, for moderating this discussion. I thank Bloomberry for this opportunity. On the onset, one may wonder why Bharat Krishak Samaj, a farmers' organization, is co-hosting a discussion on this book. The answer is simple. The book addresses the most pressing issues of our times and of future generations. The crisis the authors address is upon us and has been in the making for a long time. To offset policy failures, falling voter patience, and depleting political capital, our welfare system, instead of helping youngsters to find jobs, is increasingly skewed towards locking generations into populist benefits. For the agriculture, the authors rightly diagnose solutions to India's agriculture problems lies outside agriculture and not in palliatives like cash transfers. And let me add, as being from a farmers' organization, is that neither will food prices be allowed to rise ever, and off-farm job opportunities are not being created. And that is exactly why this book is very important for these times, and which is why, as farmers, we seek a new economic paradigm where, rather than focusing on income-centric objectives, the country needs to focus on building human capacity and farmer livelihoods. And I think these are completely different objectives with which economics has not addressed. Let me welcome, like we welcome the monsoons, we warmly welcome all those who are here and who have come to listen to the brightest economists we have. I will, before I request Shareen to come and take this forward, I will request the panelists to unveil the book. If you could we could unveil the book now, and then I'll hand it over to Shareen to take it forward. Let's all give them a hand, please. So much. I'll leave the floor.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
You can take the books.
Okay.
Because we've already got copies.
Get them all back.
Thank you very much, Ajay. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's great to be here in the presence of individuals that I've had the opportunity, the pleasure, and the privilege of speaking to for a good part of the last 2 decades, addressing a lot of these issues that the book tries to grapple with, not just the jobs crisis, but really to find the way forward and to prescribe a remedy on what the government needs to prioritize, what the private sector needs to prioritize. I don't know how many of you have actually gone through the book, but it's instructive in the issues that it addresses. I think there is a lot of emphasis and focus on what needs to be prioritized. Of course, the need for an industrial policy, a manufacturing policy. We were supposed to have a new manufacturing policy in place, but unfortunately, don't know when that is going to be unveiled, but it hasn't been put out in the public so far. It also addresses the issue about R&D spends and why India continues to lag on R&D spends, what needs to be done there. It addresses the very crucial issue, something that I've been particularly focused on of the low rate of women's participation in the workforce and what needs to be done to address that and how that can in fact steer into the eventual goal of a Viksit Bharat by 2047. But there's plenty to unpack here, and for those who have read the book, this would be a good refresher, but for those who haven't, let me invite the author himself. It's best to hear it from him. He's going to very quickly give us a glimpse, a snapshot of what the book is hoping to capture, the messaging that the book hopes to put forward up for public debate. Then we'll get started. We want to make this as interactive as possible. We've got stalwarts here in the panel, but we've got many who've been part of the India growth story in different forms, in different avatars over the past 2 decades. So we would like to hear from each one of you on what you believe the India imperatives are. But without further ado, Santosh, over to you.
Thank you very much indeed. So kind of you, Shareen, to accept our invite. And above all, of course, my former boss, Dr. Montek in Ahluwalia, and my good friend, Dr. Rakesh Mohan, to agree to come and be panelists. And thank you all very much indeed for coming. And of course, above all, a big thank you to both Bloomsbury as well as, most importantly, Bharat Krishak Samaj for even organizing this. And hats off to you, Ajay. So let me get going. I plan to take no more than 12 minutes. So let me focus on what I believe are the main messages. So the puzzle that motivated this book. India is one of the fastest growing major economies of the world, although the actual growth is perhaps lower than has been claimed. I've argued that. Arvind Subramaniam has argued that, as well as other economists. Yet, so fastest growing economy, yet manufacturing has stagnated, agriculture has reabsorbed millions of workers, real wages have barely grown for a decade. Educated unemployment remains persistently high. It shot up to double its level in 2012. By 2017, informal workers still are 90% of the total workforce. Unorganized firms still account for 85% of all firms in the country, and most of those firms are actually unregistered. So the central question that the book attempts to address are how can an economy grow rapidly while formal productive employment grows so slowly. And what I want you to appreciate and understand is that time is running out. Our demographic dividend ends by 2040. We demonstrate that in a full chapter in that book. And this and please appreciate that this takes into account the fact that the TFR of the Hindi belt states is still higher than those of the southern. Moving on. So the central argument of the book argues that India's growth story is still incomplete. Economic growth has occurred, but structural transformation has actually stalled and in key respects, as I will shortly argue, reversed. Instead of moving steadily from agriculture to manufacturing to modern services, India has witnessed weak manufacturing growth. Female WPR, meaning work participation rates, have risen from 2017, although they were falling consistently. And please appreciate that female labor force participation rates in India are among the lowest in the world, comparable to those found in Saudi Arabia and Yemen. And they were falling. They have risen from 17 to 25, but most of it is in unpaid family labor. Please appreciate unpaid family labor and back in agriculture and also in own account work. And there's been renewed dependence on agriculture. Even in 2025, the latest PLFS told us there were 65 million more workers in agriculture than there were in 2019. Moving on to the structural retrogression point, we've heard a lot about Make in India, we've heard a lot about PLI, but what has happened actually to manufacturing share in gross value added from 2011 to 2024? This graph shows that. The first data point here is 17%. And look at the far right, it's 14%, 14.3% is a proportion of GVA. And it's been consistently declining, you will notice, from about 2016 onwards. It falls after demonetization and other policy-induced shocks. This is the first dimension of, it's not just this, manufacturing employment actually fell for 5 years after the policy-induced shock. For 5 years, in absolute terms, never in India's history had it fallen, and most of the job losses were in labor-intensive sectors. Moving on, here is another dimension of the structural reversal. Employment in agriculture and in allied sectors has actually grown. The red line is just showing what the share of employment in total employment is, in agriculture, that is, share of employment in agriculture. It was consistently dropping, and it fell very, very sharply from about 2004 to 2012 in particular, and then stabilized in 2018-19 at 42%. You should also please keep in mind that until 2004, for 50 years, the absolute number of workers in agriculture was still growing, although the share of workers in agriculture was dropping. However, what you notice now is the absolute number of the black line. The absolute number of workers in agriculture in 2019 was 200 million. In 2024, it stood at 281 million, which is 80 million workers more than in agriculture. That means a 20% increase in agriculture in a matter of 4 or 5 years. Never in the history of India had something like this. This is a structural retrogression of a kind no country in the world has ever seen. And most of this increase in agriculture was accounted for by unpaid family labor and own-account work, especially the return of women. Moving on, why has India's growth become so slow? It's unless labor-intensive growth slowed from what was 7.8% per annum from 2003-4 to 2015 to, in the last 10 years, 6.2%. And as I said, this is the growth rate claimed for the last 10 years, though many of us have rightly questioned it. But so growth has slowed in any case by the government's own estimates. But employment generation has slowed much more. The book identifies 3 structural constraints. One is the investment. Private investment has remained well below levels associated with sustained 8% GDP growth, which is what we need if we are to become a Vikasit Bharat. Second, exports, merchandise exports in particular. Services exports have continued to thrive. They were thriving earlier. They were growing at 15 to 16% until 2014. They've continued to grow at 15 to 16% per annum. They were growing, the merchandise exports were growing at about 15% earlier. The merchandise exports growth rate has fallen to 2-3%. They actually fell in dollar terms for about 5 or 6 years. And the significant decline, particularly in labor-intensive job creation. Third, of course, third driver of growth could be government expenditure, and of course, public infrastructure investment has risen very significantly in recent years. It's still not at the level that was the peak achieved in the preceding government, but nevertheless, it's still very high. The problem, of course, is how much fiscal space remains with the government. Despite windfall oil price gains over the last 10 years compared to the preceding 10 years, the fiscal deficit of the general government, which means center and states taken together, is still over 7% of GDP. So all components of aggregate demand, we argue, are seeing significant constraints. Over the last 10 years, the total investment to GDP ratio has been in the range of 26 to 32%, compared to the 32 to 38% that prevailed in the preceding 10-year period, what we call the dream run. So, it was an over-regulated economy then. We're still an over-regulated economy. So yes, regulation is an issue. Do not misunderstand that I'm against, changes in regulation. But the point is, let's put every blame on regulation. That's a right argument to make, but clearly it was already there. Manufacturing capacity utilization is stuck at 75%. For a decade, household savings are down. So I'm talking about household savings. Corporate savings are doing very well, thank you very much, but they're not investing. Why not? We'll see. So because obviously aggregate demand is down. So consumption has been maintained by households, both in rural as well as in urban middle class, through gold loans and through RBI credit. And the RBI is already sort of cracking down at the banks, saying, should you really be continuing to lend on retail for so long? And of course, wealth and income inequality is sharply up. So the key message that we are trying to send out is that employment outcomes depend not only on the rate of growth, but also on the composition of that growth. So India currently faces not one jobs crisis, but 4 interconnected labor market challenges. There are nothing short of 6 to 7 million young people joining the labor force each year, all of whom are much better educated, much better educated. A very large subgroup of that is, of course, girls and women, who, even in the Hindi belt, even in rural Hindi belt, they've all gotten pretty much universal secondary access education. And that's the sort of first bunch. The second bunch, of course, consists of the agricultural surplus labor. Agriculture still was already 42%, accounting for 16-17% of GDP in 2019. It's now shot up in 2024 to 46%. So, okay, in 2025, that number is down from 80 million to 65 million. Fact of the matter is, what in 10 years we have to achieve is to bring it down at least to the 200 million. If that was to happen, agriculture would still then account for about 29%, our estimate is, of the total workforce. Finally, of course, given that non-farm jobs have not been growing, and however, the farm jobs have grown, that's why the government was able to claim that jobs are growing. In 2012, we estimate the number of not in education, employment, and training youth between 15 and 29 who were NEETs used to be in 2012 about 50 million. Currently, they stand at about 100 million. One subgroup of that, of course, is the unemployed, which is around 30 million today. So all these people have to be accommodated. What is the unemployment rate? What has happened to the unemployment rate? Unemployment rate really matters to the young and the educated. What you are seeing here is sort of data from 1993 all the way to 2024. That's what the bars are showing. And their unemployment rates by education level and by training. I'll just spend 1 minute looking at this. Just let, for a moment, look at graduate unemployment. It used to be in 2012, 20%. It shot up to 36%, although it's down. The young are actually showing that they are in agriculture. Many of these are girls. If you were formally vocationally trained, I'll come to that in a second, the number had also gone from 12% to 26%. And if you had some 1 year or 2 years or 3 years of technical training, that's the last set of bars, it had gone from 19 to 37%. So, what's the problem? Clearly, fewer jobs are being created. However, there is an additional problem. There's also an educational crisis, which I want you to sort of focus on. This pie chart, which shows you the educational level of the current workforce in 2024. Illiterates still, in 24, accounted for 23% of the population. Look at the right-hand side of the graph. Another 19% are primary, another 21% are middle. That means 67% of the total workforce has less than 8 years of education. Those with secondary and higher secondary is just another 20%, but graduates and above in the workforce account for only 9%. And those with formal training is barely 3%, and those with technical training is just 5%. So two realities coexist. India still has too few workers. I'll just take 2 more minutes. India still has too few workers with advanced education and technical skills, while experiencing very high unemployment among graduates and technically trained youth. Why? Because education policy and growth strategy have evolved separately. The new education policy, believe it or not, does not even mention the labor market once. There is a focus on taking our gross enrollment ratio for higher education from 29% currently to 50% by 2035, and literally in 10 years. That means we've already seen a massification, a very rapid massification over the last 10 to 15 years of higher education, essentially on the strength of a private sector expansion. The private sector expansion has taken the number of affiliated colleges used to be 10,000 in the year 2000. It today stands at 58,000. Most of that is in the private sector. You can imagine when you get this level of massification, what is the employability of these? The government also wants to take GER of vocational education to 50% from 3%. The education system, meanwhile, is actually coping with crises like the NEET paper leaks, et cetera, et cetera. So the key message we are trying to send, and the book discusses this at some length, the skills and TVET creation has been largely supply-led by the government. It's been government-driven, supply-driven, not demand-driven. Because if it was demand-driven, then it would be industry-driven. Unfortunately, in the whole skills game, industry has no skills, has no skin in the game. Finally, moving on, just last two slides, rethinking India's growth strategy needs a development strategy that integrates, obviously, productive agriculture. I won't have time to talk about that, to sustain rural incomes and domestic demand, but food still accounts for 36% of total consumption. So clearly, there's much less money left over with the vast majority of the population for non-farm goods. It needs a manufacturing strategy. For 35 years, this country has not had an industrial policy. PLI is not a manufacturing strategy, because that's a vertical manufacturing attempt. And horizontal industrial policy is what we need. The book spells out 7 components to absorb labor of an industrial policy. Of course, we need to do much more on human capital. But above all, finally, and that's the last bullet I have, capable government to coordinate investment, industrial policy, and public services. Means the size of the state, this may surprise some of you, is too small. It's fiscally centralized and compositionally biased towards generalists. In all 3 matters, the contrast with China is utterly striking. So the regulatory regime is a problem. No one is denying that. But is it a binding constraint? Well, if it was, how come we did 8% per annum growth rate in the dream run? So finally, why the employment crisis? As aggregate demand has become structurally weak, India's employment is the consequence of 2 mutually reinforcing structural failures. One is structural transformation has stalled. Aggregate demand has remained structurally weak. No one is saying that poverty has not fallen, economic growth has reduced poverty, but is nowhere close to the claim that is being made. So 3 developments have weakened aggregate demand: rising inequality, weak manufacturing, and real wages stagnation. These will be in my last 2 slides. I want to finish with this. Real wages in rural India have stagnated for a decade, which dampens consumption. Now look at this. From 2004 till 2017 or so, jobs were growing in the non-farm sector, therefore real wages were increasing. After that, they've actually stagnated. This is rural India. Urban India, exactly the same story. Look at those graphs. So we need to complete India's structural transformation. I'm going to sort of move through this very, very, very rapidly. I just want to go to my very last slide. First, the first and second structural transformation has to be achieved before 2040. What do I mean by the first and second? The first structural transformation remains unfinished because that structural transformation has been reversed. India must still move workers into higher productivity, manufacturing and modern services, but a second transformation has already begun. The AI era requires India to combine human capital, still very poor quality, except at the top. Yes, we may have 20% chip designers in our country, but a lot else needs to be done. Manufacturing capability, well, broad-based manufacturing capability would actually be needed if we are to generate and absorb 12 million workers each year. Each year we need 12 million new non-farm jobs, not farm jobs. And finally, and this is my last bullet, and I'll sit down after this, the age of AI requires innovation with the Indian ownership of data, of compute infrastructure, intellectual property. TCS, Infosys, Wipro, how much do they spend on R&D? Precious little. All these intellectual property that you and I every day operate in, today is owned by the Magnificent Seven. And we also finally need digital platforms, currently which are all owned by global firms. So, and the GCC's employees are all working for these global firms. Let me just stop. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Santosh, for capturing some of the key highlights and the key messages from the book. I'm going to request Montek to please take the conversation forward with his opening remarks, and then I'll come to Rakesh, and then we'll open it up. Would you like to use the podium, or would you?
No, thanks. Thanks, Shareen. Thank you for referring to my comments as opening remarks. I mean, this is a very rich presentation, and he's covered the ground. So I'll just make 2 or 3 comments, actually. Comment number 1, I'm kind of reminded of what my mentor, Manmohan Singh, was very fond of saying, that in India, everything they say about India is true, but the opposite is also true. So I'd ask somebody, and I'm with CSEP, the Center for Social and Economic Policy. I said, look, I have to go and talk about that. I know Santosh has done a lot of work and usually very good, but give me a different view. So they gave me a paper. They said, why don't you look at it? Now, it has, mercifully, is much briefer than the book, as you would understand. But it's interesting. The book says India out of work, and the paper says India at work. So Manmohan Singh had a point. You need to be careful about what we are saying. So let me say, just make 3 points. Point number 1, people who go into a discussion on employment and think that they're now narrowing the field are making a huge mistake, because employment is generated by the whole economy. And before you know what has happened, it's all about agriculture and structural this and manufacturing, and he's even brought in AI at the very end. So we're discussing everything, okay? So really what you're asking yourself is, how is this economy doing in this area, okay? Now it's, as they often say, I mean, the poor are too poor to stay unemployed. Most of all, since you don't have unemployment insurance, so you take whatever job you've got. I mean, the number of graduates, for example, who are taking very, very low-paid jobs makes it very uninteresting that if you're a graduate, you get a job easier than if you're a school-educated fellow, because the graduate is taking your job if you're a school-educated fellow. So I think we need to look at quality of employment also, and I think he's pointed out, and even in this paper, the fact that real wages are not growing at the lower end, this seems to be generally agreed. So whatever we may say about employment, for a country that's growing at 6%, 6% means the per capita GDP is growing at something of the order of 4.5%. So unless there's some unequal distribution going on, you would expect that wages would go at 3 or 4%. They're not. You can argue that, well, they're a little bit growing and it's not 0 and it's 1 or something, but they're not growing. So that is clearly a big problem. Now, from an I love this word aspirational, because we've invented this into the English language. It actually enables you to transform whatever you like. Because if you can add the word aspirational, then, now aspirational middle class. I mean, there's no question.
Aspirational districts also.
Yes.
Everything is aspirational.
100 of them.
Right, exactly. I think you've got to recognize that, if you were running the country or whoever's running the country, we have created on the part of a lot of people the expectation that education opportunities are growing, public education is free, people are going into school, there are more and more universities, etc., and that we are heading in a long-term path to Viksit Bharat, etc. So I think people expect that when they graduate, they're going to get what they call decent jobs. And I think this is one issue on which you need to see whether the different data agree. My feeling is they do agree, and that the jobs available are simply not up to people's expectation. You could argue, quite rightly by the way, that the expectations are unrealistic. A lot of employers will tell you that I need skilled labor and I can't get it. And I've talked to people and they tell me that. But nevertheless, it's a social problem and we have to address it. Santosh, of course, joins the romantic love of manufacturing. And let's be clear about it. If we had a strategy that would enable us sustainably to grow on the basis of services in which people get 10% per annum growth of real wages, would we be saying, no, that's no good, because manufacturing must increase? I wouldn't. However, the truth is that services don't provide. Most of our services are really low-end services. And secondly, I think if you really, this is where exports come in. I mean, we can't export low-end services. Nobody's interested in them. We were exporting high-end services, but technology is going to clobber that. Because everything I hear about AI tells me that all these wonderful firms, which Santosh feels are making a huge mistake, but which he's right, not doing enough R&D, and not even going to be doing enough employment generation. And they've said, and that's not just in India, it's everywhere. So I think the role of generating jobs through services, the high-end services, is now restricted. Of course, if we can get into AI and produce even higher-end services, there is scope. But let's be clear, that's an incredibly capital-intensive area. And do we have the money for that? Half the problems with all our programs, we keep announcing programs, and everybody loves them. I mean, I do too. We need more infrastructure, health, we need more schools, we need more centers for, plug-and-play industrial parks, we need everything. And each one of these things costs money, and the one thing the government actually doesn't have is money. So how exactly are we going to address that? That's an issue when you go into saying, look, can we do it PPP? You get an incredible pushback, because civil society hates PPP. They view it as simply a way of pampering some industrialists. So quite frankly, I think what we are discussing here is not employment. We are discussing here what is the change in the structure of the economy that we need in order to, whatever you want to call it, get to Viksit Bharat or just get to 7+% or 8+% growth. So not surprisingly, I mean, it's not, people who come in saying, this is what I'm really interested in, at the end of the day will say, what the hell's going on? I'm not at all interested in exports. And here are these guys going on and on about export. That is really the problem. I think I'm not giving you a solution, but no doubt people will raise questions. And I'm urging them to raise those questions so that the discussion gets focused. And then Santosh will answer all those questions. Thank you.
Well, you've done a quick Pele pass there so that all the questions are going to come to Santosh in the spirit of the World Cup that's currently underway. But Rakesh, if I could get you to...
Can I speak from there?
Yeah, of course, please do.
See, I have lots of notes. So we'll be there for what, an hour or something like that.
You didn't outsource that job, is it?
That's why we'll be here for at least an hour. Okay. So first of all, congratulations, Santosh, for this marvelous book. But, I was wondering, why was I asked and why was Montek asked? Then look at the title of the book, India Out of Work. So we've been out of work for quite some time now. So we are totally appropriate for this session. I'll just raise a few issues. One, which Santosh already mentioned, most important, first as a macro. I didn't used to be a macro person, but I have been now for some years. That he pointed this out. To get to the kind of growth rate he's talking about, you do need to increase the investment rate from around 30% now to in excess of 35%. The arithmetic just isn't there, okay? And as an aside, everyone who curses the Hindu rate of growth should remember what the savings rate was in the 50s. You couldn't get 10% growth or 8% growth or 5% growth out of a 7 or 8 or 9% savings rate. That's just an aside, okay? But so the first most important thing Santosh pointed out is that this is something that is crucial. Raising the investment rate to 35-36% or something of that order. I won't rely on one number. But it also means raising the savings rate to 35-36% or something of that order with some external savings in addition, okay? And in some sense, I don't see any discussion currently in the country on how that can be done, okay? Why have savings gone down? It is a fact, from 1950 to 2010 or thereabouts, savings went up continuously. Absolutely, of course with some ups and downs in the middle. But essentially, since the last 15 years, they have stagnated or rather, in fact, they've gone down. So that's number one. Number two, the associate point, again, which you mentioned, is why is corporate private investment not taking place? I don't have an answer. But in terms of generation of jobs, and we're talking manufacturing jobs, and by the way, Montek, I don't agree with you on not importance on manufacturing. I'll come to that later. No, you said, you implied that.
Do services,
you implied that.
pretty good.
Don't take back your words now. Okay. So you got to generate more manufacturing jobs, you have to have pharma private sector investment, and that is not happening in the way it did till from about 2002, 2009. Of course, that was the time that I was Deputy Governor RBI, so things had to be good, and everything has gone down since then. We just take that one variable, find a lot of things are explained on what has happened in the country in the last 15 years. So it really is a puzzle, because it is true that in 2010s, many corporate sector balance sheets were strained, and of course, consequently, the bank's balance sheets. That has all got repaired now for the last 5 years. So why is that turnaround not taking place? To unemployment, I want to point out unemployment comparison with China. We have this false impression that we have specialized in services and China in manufacturing. It is just untrue. In terms of the value added as a proportion of GDP, we're about the same, around 56, 57, 58% of GDP in China and here. There is no difference. Okay. Interestingly, what is different, Montek, is that the share of services in employment in China is 49%, okay, and only 30% here. So it is not the case that we have been specializing or concentrating on services at the cost of manufacturing. What we have not done is not moved people out from agriculture, what Ajay started right in the beginning, to non-agriculture, both services and manufacturing. And the point is that the difference in manufacturing is that the value-added manufacturing in China is around 25%, we're about 16, 15, 16, 17 or thereabouts. And then the associated differences in employment. And agriculture, there the agriculture is only 7% of, is the share of agriculture in GDP is 7%. Ours is still 17, 18% or something of that order. They still have 22% employment in agriculture. And we have something like 45, 46 or whatever, 43 now, something of that order. So my point basically is, and this is, I think, has to be emphasized much more in terms of structural transformation, is to do with manufacturing. And more service jobs will be created also. And that's the important point. That if we do much more in labor-intensive manufacturing and move people, and particularly export-oriented, move people from agriculture to manufacturing, labor-intensive manufacturing, you'll also generate more service jobs. And that's the point, actually, rather than versus service, manufacturing versus services. So I think that's something that needs to be kept in mind in terms of structural transformation you're talking about. Stop me anytime you want, okay? Because I can go on for an hour, right? I have enough notes here. What is most surprising, actually, as what Santosh pointed out, and this is really ahistorical in terms of global development, is the recent increase in people employed in agriculture. And they're obviously not employed, they're underemployed in agriculture. And I think that's the most serious issue which needs to be thought about. One point that has not been mentioned, and it is connected to all of this, is urbanization. Okay? Now, we haven't had a census since 2011, so one can't speak authoritatively. From what I read, because we feel unhappy that we can't say we're only 35% urbanized, people are finding all kinds of measures to say we are much more. Okay, don't believe them. We are still only about 35% urbanized, and this has a connection with all of this structural transformation. That is, if you to have large labor-intensive manufacturing, it has to be in urban areas or in cities. Okay, and the connection, in some sense, with labor intensity and also flexibility in labor laws, etc. You can only have flexibility if a chap who gets fired thinks that I can get another job. if the chap who is going to get fired thinks I can't get a job, they obviously do everything possible, and I will agree with him or her that you can't get fired. So this is a very close connection with urban strategy, urban governance, etc., that you've got to think of large labor-intensive manufacturing units in large cities. Then there's enough of a pool of labor so that people feel comfortable. Ye jayega to wahan mil jayega job. You see, and I think that's very important. And for this, there is an issue, both in terms of flexibility in land assembly for large enterprises, and also labor flexibility. And the two go together. The problem is that because of our urban land policies forever, actually, the urban land prices are far too high for labor-intensive large factories to be located in urban areas, because it just doesn't make sense. What China did here was very interesting as far as I can understand, and may not be 100% correct, which is that it was by force, actually, as I understand it. Because the central government at the start of the reform process, etc., because the central government had no money to give to the states and cities, the cities were forced to use their land, okay, to give them, acquire the land, give it almost free or very, very low prices to industry, and make the money from non-industry land development. And it was not a strategy. It happened because they couldn't get money from the central government. They had to raise their own money, okay? And so I'm not saying we should do that, but I think there's something here that we need to think about, that how can we make it easier for enterprises to assemble land for large-scale manufacturing. And here this also comes the issue of the social security, etc., and I won't go into that. Finally, and the last point, of course, he had 4 last points, so I'll try not to have 4, maybe I'll just have 5, you know. I think this issue of, you talked about manufacturing not growing because demand stagnating because inadequate rise in incomes, wages, etc. And this is where the exports come in. That in some sense, there is no limit to demand. If you think of the world as your oyster, which we should, all right? To give an example, I don't know why we can't export shirts, all right? The shirt I'm wearing is Raymond's. I bought Raymond's shirt because this Indian shirt I'm buying. Go home, what do I find in the label? Made in China. But it's not a cheap shirt. Huh? It's not the case that we can't make, this is 4,000 rupees. I don't know why I have to pay 4,000 rupees for a shirt, but why is it that the Indian company, old company Raymond's, fully vertically integrated, from retail shops to manufacturing, why can't they manufacture a 4,000 rupees shirt in India? I don't know. Seriously. And the point is that if you look at the next 20, 30 years, the average, say, per capita income of Asia to the east of us, something like 5,000, 6,000, something of that order. Suppose they will grow around 4 or 5% a year, maybe a little, around 4 or 5% a year. West is gone. The center of gravity of the global economy is moving from the mid-Atlantic to somewhere between Indian Ocean and Pacific Ocean, okay? And yet we keep looking there, west. Is that west? I don't know. I'm very happy that the Prime Minister is now spending time in Asia. Maybe you are figuring this out. But the point I'm making is that the kind of growth in markets which Asian countries, Korea, Taiwan, Japan earlier, China, utilize in terms of the demand growth in the West is going to happen from the East. And therefore, we've got to concentrate on labor-intensive manufacturing goods to export to the East. If you just look at the numbers of exports to Japan, China, Korea together, it's pitiful. It's irrelevant, actually. I don't understand. This is where the private sector, why aren't they going? They go on wandering all over the place. So they've got to, why are they not looking at export? Don't tell me you can't export more than 15 billion or 20 billion to China. I mean, I can't believe it. Only about 6 billion each to Japan and Korea. So the basic point here that all of this goes together. Urbanization, cities, manufacturing in cities, of course for export more on the coast, except for the stuff that you can ship by air. So I think these are some of the issues that need to be talked about. Finally, how many finally? Okay, I've said 22. Okay, so just on the education side, actually, we're now producing 10 million graduates a year. I'm not talking about the quality. I just want to say something about the vocational education kick that we're on these days. Okay, there are very few instances in the world of successful organized vocational education. Okay, now you're talking about the educated unemployed. I moved recently. I couldn't believe that some of the fellows who were doing my packing and unpacking, okay, just absolutely kind of more basic work, were graduates. And it was very interesting, 2 or 3 of them who were packing and unpacking my books, they were so happy doing that, you know, because they were educated, they were graduates, they were actually taking time, taking a book out, looking at it, and so on. So I think this is a really serious issue. The positive side, it means that we have a stock of people who can be trained. And what I think about this is that when the IT services started, Infosys, Wipro, TCS, the usual suspects, and there was this huge growth of these private sector training shops, colleges, technical colleges, particularly in the south. They took those raw people and trained them before they could start getting pregnant. And all that happened. So all I'm saying, Santosh, on this vocational training is the training has to come from within firms, right? Second, what we've forgotten is our old training system, from guru to shishya. There's the plumber teaching fellows, electrician, you know, carpenter, and so on. So I think there has to be more imaginative stuff of getting the people who do this kind of professional work. And I see that new companies like the urban companies are perhaps doing this. So I think that there is an issue here, but I don't think it's going to happen out of formal vocational systems. So only 3 finals?
Only 3 final points from you, but thank you very much, Rakesh Mohan, for your comments. I think I'm going to actually take up from what we heard there from Montek to say that this is not just a jobs issue, this is a larger economic debate and an economic challenge that we want to talk about. Yes.
This retrogression of structural change is really very important, what he's emphasizing.
And I can see Surjit Bhalla there, so I'm going to get him to dive into that as well. But you were right in pointing out that India surprises both the optimists and the pessimists at the same time, and we can continue to have those conversations with 2 very different lenses. But I want to address the issue of private investment, because that is at the heart of many conversations that we're having here this afternoon, and the heart of many conversations that happen at the level of policy making as well. And I don't think that I've heard a convincing answer from anybody at this point in time on what is going on. Balance sheets have been cleared up. Corporate balance sheets are delevered at this point in time. Everybody says that we're betting on economy growing at 7% plus, and yet capacity utilization continues to be at 70-75% across different industries. Greenfield capacity hard to, at least in some sectors, it's patchy. It's not a secular sort of a movement that we're seeing. What is the problem with private sector investment in the country? I'd like all 3 of you to take a stab at that, and then maybe we'll open it up.
I have no idea.
Okay, no idea.
I'm just as ignorant. It's an important question.
Yes.
But
frankly,
it's a very serious question.
I haven't seen a good explanation for it.
Santosh? Your mic.
I already have a mic. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, great. So the argument I think we're making in the book is that there have been so many policy shocks that have been induced since 2016 that incomes and jobs particularly have stopped growing. In the unorganized sector in particular, in the non-farm sector, you see the we were always arguing that the MSMEs had not only stopped growing, they'd actually collapsed in terms of number of jobs. And that was demonstrated beyond a shadow of doubt when the annual survey of enterprises in the unorganized sector came out first in 22-23, then in 23-24, and it shows unmistakably that even in 2024 you hadn't gotten to the level of MSME jobs and unorganized sector jobs that you had in 2015-16. You barely have gotten there. Now, if that is the case, then clearly it shows up in the household savings. You see, corporate savings, Rakesh, are doing very fine, thank you very much. I looked at the economic survey data, the series entirely, the corporate savings, Shareen, are in the region of 10 to 15% of GDP, which was the level which we saw in the dream run, but they're not investing. So what are they doing with their money now that, their balance sheets are very clean, as you rightly say, and their corporate income tax has been cut? They don't see why they should if at 75% capacity utilization. So they're taking their money abroad. That's what we are beginning to see. First they waited and waited, and now finally they've decided to take their money abroad. I mean, how we will break this cycle is a question that I think we address in the book, but that requires a whole series of interventions. There's just no getting away from that. I mean, and yes, I'm not denying for a minute that regulatory state has to, I'm really absolutely delighted by the fact that Mr. Rajiv Gauba has come up with a report very quickly. They want to do away, most of the actions are being taken at the state level, some at the central level. 700 actions were identified, or 700 plus actions were identified, of which apparently I hear from Nageshwaran that some 600 have already been taken. Well, they've only just been taken. Let's wait to see if just removing the regulations actually changes the situation. I don't believe.
What 700 are these?
These are all so-called regulations that are in
Ease
place,
of
which
doing
Gauba had identified.
100 have been taken, not 600.
No, I'm telling you what Nageshwaran said in Washington, D.C. in a conference. I heard it just yesterday. I heard the full lecture.
Maybe he did it, yes, I don't know.
No, he did it summer. I assure you, he did that.
Okay, as with many data points, there's a divergence, 100 to 600, but I'll get to that in just a second. Sujit, you want to come in on this, the issue with private investment, why we're not seeing private investment pick up? I mean, the government is pretty much, every day the finance minister sort of rails her hands and says, we've done what we could, we've cut taxes, we've done the ease of doing business and so on and so forth. What do you think the problem is?
All of us are economists.
Stand up, you'll be easier heard.
I can walk down with my mic.
No, it's mine.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll speak up. What is loud enough? So on private investment, why are we asking that question? Why are they not? At any other time in history, in almost any country, you would say that the answer would be, look at the incentives. And then you'll find out why they're doing X or why they're doing Y. So does the private investor have an incentive to invest? I think first we need to answer that question. Then we can get to more complicated answers.
So
simple
do you think
answer.
that they're not incentivized enough, or do you think that they're in fact disincentivized from investing?
Look, everybody has talked about regulation in India, over-regulation. Everybody's talked about protection. So therefore, if you are in the regulated sector, that is in the government, you have all the incentive to invest because you get free money. If you are not in the government sector, you need to get a rate of return on your investment. And the second part, because of the protection, everybody, all your Raymonds, etc., they're all very comfortable. So they were very comfortable with their existence, with the protection that they get. Textiles, are we missing out something? Why is textiles not growing in India? So I think, let's not make it too complicated. It's simple, markets, stupid.
Okay. I want to link the point that you made on protection.
I just want to make a comment on that.
Yeah,
which
go
he had
ahead.
made actually, which was that look, is the regulatory environment today much worse than it was in the 2000s?
Is it?
Okay, because investment was taking place
That's the point.
leaps and bounds in the 2000s.
That's the counterfactual.
The corporate savings rate was similar in the 2000s as
Absolutely.
now. The difference was that the household savings was much higher, financial savings. The corporates were dissaving because of investment, and they're taking money in the households. So my question is that look, is it the case that the opportunity for making money is worse now? Are the regulations worse now? I don't understand.
Yeah.
Point I did want to make, apart from private investment, is that something strange has happened in the world post the great financial crisis. Okay. Look at every country, this is welcome to globalization. Every country in the world has seen a slowdown in its rate of growth. There might be one or two exceptions, every country.
Yeah.
This is what, if you will, China has done or whatever. But you look at that. Now you want to look at wages in the advanced countries for educated wages. Wages have grown at minus 0.4% real wages since 2005. If you want to look at developing countries, it's minus 0.1%. If you want to look at unemployment, graduate unemployment, it's higher wherever you go. China has even stopped publishing. So I think we need to recognize what globalization has done. Why has it been the case? I would point to China. Don't look any further as to why the whole world seems to be in a problem as far as manufacturing is concerned. And after that, I would look at ourselves. We haven't done anything to really improve our situation. And I think we need to go deeper, and this is the last point I want to make. We need to go deeper into why our growth rate is not as high as we would like, as our aspirations. Okay? 8.5, Viksit or whatever. And I think, a large part of the problem, apart from incentives, is that every major actor is very comfortable. Okay? They're making their profits, they're doing this, that, etc. So I think, we have aspirations. And I think most of the middle class, etc., represented over here, has aspirations because we are all involved with the Western world, with China and everything else. And we want to be like them. And I see nothing wrong with that. But if you want to look at the growth rate of India, aggregate growth rate for the last 30 years, it's a very respectable 6.5%. Not many countries have that rate of growth.
Yep.
So, let's decide that we want to move out of our comfort zone, and then we can discuss policy.
Speaking about moving out of our comfort zones, and I want to link that to the point that you made on protection, to the point that was made on exports as well. We've signed a spate of FTAs, and I know the book talks about what went wrong with the FTAs that we did through the 2000s. But we're signing these new FTAs, and a lot of people seem to believe that the FTAs could in fact be the catalyst for change. They could be the catalyst for innovation, because if you don't perform, you're going to perish. Could it in fact then be the catalyst or the accelerator, even as far as the India export story is concerned? Montek, let me start by asking you.
No, I'm quite clear on that. By the way, they haven't yet been signed.
Well,
I mean,
the UK one is operational from the 15th of July.
Yes,
so yes.
and the other one will come next year, but fine. I'm very much in favor of that. I've said many times that we should also join the CPTPP, which is the East Asian one. I think most of us probably have the same view. It will make a difference. But please remember that we must let the public know that if we are signing FTAs then it really means in some of these big industries which provide inputs for the medium, petrochemicals, man-made fibers, steel, aluminum, copper, the duties are too high.
Exactly.
We've just had a 12% depreciation of the rupee over a year or so. We still have 10 and 15%, if not higher, duties on these things. We keep talking about these FTAs. If we are confident that we're going to sign these FTAs, let's lower these duties tomorrow. We don't have to wait for budgets. And I think this is exactly the point. It's an operationally identifiable thing, which it's what they used to call a stroke of the pen reform. I mean, getting things like educational systems working and training systems working is a 5-year affair. Cutting duties, 5 minutes.
1 minute.
One
fair
minute
enough.
stroke. Yeah.
I'd like to take issue with Montek on that actually, because I know he keeps making this point. He's been making this same point for about 6 or 7 years.
Who?
You.
I'm just
You
checking.
were my boss 20 years, 10 years
on,
ago. You're not my boss any longer, so I'm going to take you on.
Merit and consistency.
Did he make the same point when he was your boss?
No, not in those days. In the last that's why I said 6 or 7 years. So you see, the trouble with this argument that we have to reduce tariffs, yes, of course we have to reduce tariffs, but can we do it in such a way, Shareen, that we take into account the fact that our manufacturing is being stymied by the inverted duty structure across a whole series of products? Now, if you just across the board cut duties, you are going to do our manufacturing in even more. If you're going to reduce duties, you make sure that you don't reduce duties for finished products. What you do is to reduce duties on raw materials first, and then it should be slightly higher on intermediates, so that these intermediates and raw materials, which are inputs into domestic manufacturing, can be imported at lower cost, lower duty than finished products. That's not the way it is. It's not the situation for PCB today. That's the problem. There are people here who've been members of the Competition Council. You go and talk to them. They'll tell you exactly what. You please explain to me why, for instance, quite the opposite of what Korea used to do, we used to have until 2015 a tariff commission, which in any case had unfortunately become defunct. It's very unfortunate in the Ministry of Commerce. The tariff commission's job should be to do detailed work, product by product, sub-product by sub-product, and decide what should be the duty level. The CII and the FICCI for about a decade have been making this point about IDS, but no one listens. Now, I had this discussion with Montek earlier over the phone, and Montek said, oh, but GST is actually taking care of it. No, it is not. All the GST is done is to actually take care of the inverted duty structure in respect of the domestic taxes, and etc. It's got nothing to do with customs duty IDS. There's a whole slew of products which are impacted by that, and there are among the big houses in our country who are big people in the CII and the FICCI. They obviously are being better heard than the potential manufacturers. If we did ensure that those manufacturers were heard, then the CII and the FICCI wouldn't be saying, let's have tariff rates of 2.5% on raw materials, 5% on intermediates, and 7.5% on. That would still be much lower, Montek, than what we have.
No, I don't. I know that. And by the way,
finally, I found something to disagree with them vehemently.
Fair enough. Okay. I'm telling you what CII and FICCI is.
Why do you want to listen to CII FICCI? They are the fellows who cause all the trouble. Very seriously, actually, this business of saying raw material, intermediate goods, and final. What is my intermediate is final to someone else. Yeah. Okay, so practically this is impossible to do. People have been saying for 50 years. We, if I can say we here, Montek, corrected a lot of this from the early 90s to the mid 2000s. Okay, so that basically there is no rationale, zero economic rationale for having this graded. Because A, you can't figure out what is raw, what is intermediate, what is final. Two, that you're just increasing the effective protection for the final good, making it more and more inefficient. if you need to have a duty for revenue purposes, have a flat 5% across the board. Then the exchange will take care of it. Okay? But this business of choosing tariff commission, I'm glad it's been abolished because that's exactly what they would do. Interfere in particular items. Ye aayega, wo aayega, butter aayega, ya fiber aayega. That's rubbish. You know, just flat duty of 5%, 7%, whatever you want for say for revenue purposes, and then the exchange takes care of it.
That's what an FTA would do.
Yeah.
So, but it again, the wisdom of Manmohan saying that everything they say about the opposite is also true.
Is also true.
People should know that you can argue that.
That is correct.
Okay.
But let's address the issue that you raise in the book around the need for a new industrial policy and a new manufacturing policy as well. And let me put this in the context of what we've seen happen with the defense sector in the last 10 years. And by all accounts, this is a sector that has seen improvement. We've actually at a record high in terms of exports, albeit on a small base. We've seen, even from a market cap point of view, the PSU defense stocks have done well. We've seen the government produce indigenization lists, which has in fact kick-started the procurement process for public sector companies. We're also now seeing private sector involvement in the defense sector in a much bigger way. Even the startups that you talk about in the book are now participating in the defense story. If you don't believe PLI is the answer to addressing India's manufacturing problem or the employment problem, can we take some lessons from how we've been able to address what's happening in the defense sector as a way forward?
Yes, we can. The only issue, Shareen, with that is that defense, by definition, is high tech. It will not ever create too many jobs. Please don't misunderstand. I would want to see India become less of a outright importer of our Rafales. We should be manufacturing them. That was the original deal that was signed in 2013. However, that didn't turn out the way it could. So, but the point is that across the board in manufacturing, we have to take in the labor intense, you see, you've read chapter 9, and those of you who've not read the book, please read chapter 9. It specifically deals with all the issues that have actually been addressed. We have literally 10 minutes to say what I have to say. It's not possible humanly possible. But let me just try and summarize. You did a good job, by the way. Thank you very much. Let me just say the following. There are several things that could be done that are not being done, that were not also done earlier, let me assure you. But what we need to do is to ensure that the MSMEs begin to grow in the way they were growing earlier, because they are the ones who generate the jobs in the non-farm sector. And that requires a whole cluster development approach. You read about this, 5,500 organically grown clusters already exist across the length and breadth of this country. We don't need to create, TVEs, township and village enterprises. We do need to induce the creation of industrial parks, etc. Don't misunderstand. I mean, I am a great fan of the cluster development approach. And for late industrializers like Italy and for China, our cluster development has been extremely successful. Rural industrialization in China was done on the basis of this cluster development. So we already have 5,500 clusters. They need a certain kind of support structure which doesn't exist. And all that is spelled out in the book. I don't have the time to talk about the details of that, obviously.
Okay, you wanted to
because
come
that will generate jobs, it will create incomes, and then the aggregate demand virtuous cycle goes.
One of the worst things in our discussions of policy is that whenever we want something, the ministry that is responsible for it says, we will produce a yojana to promote that.
Yes.
Rule number one, we don't have the resources, and we shouldn't waste too much time by getting individual ministries to invent programs and what have you. I think competitive federalism, hang on a second, competitive federalism, there's a lot of talk of cooperative, which is good, but there's nothing wrong with competitive federalism. Let's take two areas, land and labor. I agree with what has been said by both of them. Our policies on land and labor are pathetic, okay? Now, both of these are state subjects. In the constitutional breakup, the center has no role at all unless it invents a role for itself, okay? Actually, I think on labor, the centers recently made, I thought, an important change that, earlier for the small industry, if you needed to retrench labor, you had to get government permission for anybody who was up to 100. And so we've raised that to 300. Now, because we forget history, people forget that it was 300 in 1980. It was when Mrs. Gandhi did some little liberalization of no consequence. Her economic advisors told her that, Madam, ye 300 ko 100 kar do, left will be happier. So what we have achieved in these 46 years, we've brought the policy back to what it was in 1980. Now, I think the government is right. Maybe they didn't want to take on the flak. But I think, I want to be corrected if I'm wrong, I think the government has said that if any state wants to raise it,
Yes.
you raise it and we will approve. I think this is a major breakthrough. I'm not joking. Now, tell me something. Why is it there's not a single state of the 29 where a chief minister doesn't go and address the public and say, I'm going to become the most attractive employer. I'm raising this to 3,000. It'll electrify the whole MSME crowd. Okay? What's stopping them? I think people like Santosh and others, we should be advising chief ministers more than sitting around advising the central government, which has a lot of advisors. The chief ministers have none, more or less, okay? So I think whoever's doing some research here, I would strongly advise, prepare a paper for each chief minister. You see them in the newspaper. Every time I open a newspaper, there's a chief minister and he's got 15 yojanas that he's announced. Not a single one says, I'm changing the law to clarify something. Do that. And my guess is that 2 or 3 will do it. And if that proves successful, and it won't take more than 3 years to know whether people are going there or not, everybody else will follow suit. You can go spend your time endlessly by talking, and no chief minister will move. So now, I don't even think they've thought that they have the freedom. So frankly, what CII and FICCI, I don't know if they're represented here, but please take note if you are. Why don't they send a little team to each chief minister saying, the Prime Minister has given you this freedom, please do it for us. And that would at least make good news. I mean, the news would cover it, no?
SMSEs and clusters and so on. I think if we can take an example of Maruti, okay, they're essentially following the Japanese example. Then you sort of a large mother firm, okay, which is providing technology, etc., and then you generate a whole number, a huge number of mostly medium rather than, we have this, we sort of keep doing small. The fact of the matter is, again, if you look at the average enterprise size in manufacturing in China and India, from 1 to 10. Okay, my friend Panagaria has documented this very well indeed. The point I'm making is, we, as with everything else, we make some mythology of SMEs give employment. Okay, that's why we have the wretched small-scale industry reservations. We still can't get out of that, right? But the point I'm making is, you need to have more organic generation of SMSEs, which is essentially based on large competitive enterprises, which can do more R&D in technical development to be competitive.
Yeah.
And then the technology flows from then to the SMSEs in clusters, etc. MSMEs by themselves will never succeed in a globalized world. Will never succeed.
Of course.
You can make any number of clusters, you can make any number of industrial estates. So please temper your comments on this. You talk about more about large enterprises generating clusters around them on a more organic basis.
Yeah, and I think we're starting to see that happen, at least in some sectors like aviation, etc., where now India is part of the tier 1, tier 2 supply base as well for a whole host of companies. I'm going to throw this open now to people who have questions. Ajay's already got one. Yes, go ahead.
Just a question.
Microphone also.
I know he's kept it with him.
I'll be the one taking it to everyone.
Host privileges.
So just the question is, will a devaluation of the Indian rupee to, let's say, 125 to $1 jumpstart this manufacturing sector? Because it helps farmers completely, because we get saved from all agriculture imports. We don't have to bother about government mitigating food prices, farm gate prices because of imports. But will it kickstart the economy?
Montek. Will 125?
I wouldn't actually, he's right in saying that if you believe, and I think it's true, that we are hugely protected, okay? And protection at the moment is a combination of duty rates as well as all kinds of QCOs and what have you. Then it's perfectly logical to say that, look, let's get rid of we would effectively make them ineffective if you were to change the exchange rate. But the impact politically, I wouldn't recommend doing that. I think that they've done a good thing by keeping the rupee weak and not letting it strengthen in real terms. They should carry on doing that. But I find it very difficult to believe that a government says, I'm going to now make the rupee go to 126 and would come out looking happy. So it's not practical, basically. But see, the point that he's making is something not generally realized, that if you've got all these things, the way we are doing it is we're putting a tax on exports. What he's suggesting would have the same effect on the import substituting side on average, and have a huge benefit to exports.
As the former RBI Deputy Governor, what would you say?
Well, I could use RBI sort of language which no one can understand, which is what I used to do, but more seriously. Just to say that, look, even when I was managing the exchange rate, actually, I never knew what is the correct level or where we should go. What I did have an eye on, which I think is what is correct, is to have an eye on keeping a realistic, real exchange rate and not letting it appreciate too much, which unfortunately the RBI and the government did until a year and a half ago for a number of years, which I think was very damaging. And as I said, I think you need to have a much simpler tariff regime rather than having something here, something here, something here. And I think that, and something I can certainly say that, look, if you look at the performance of the 2000s, the merchandise export performance, the growth rate was higher than that of China. Not the level, of course, by far, all right? So I think it does make a difference if you have a real exchange rate, which is, you never know what is the correct thing, okay? You cannot know. But only through some, you see what performance, etc., and then not let it appreciate. I think that's what you can do. You can't sort of say, I want to have 125 or 130 or 100 or 110 or whatever.
Yeah. Yes, I'll get you a microphone. Right there.
Bina.
Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you. So I'm just going to change the conversation a bit and come back to agriculture. And it seems to me we need to rethink agriculture. So Arthur Lewis offered us a description, and we've constantly treated it as a prescription. So if we don't follow the Arthur Lewis model the same way, then somehow we failed as a model of development. I think that is just not the case. So how is agriculture actually doing? We have all the negative figures of too much labor, too little contribution to GDP, but if you actually look at rates of growth, it's been fairly steady, 3%, 3.4%, even over COVID. And Santosh simply said allied, but actually the real story lies in allied, because your fisheries and your livestock actually are growing at 8%, 9%, hugely. I mean, they're a small part of overall agriculture, but pretty important. So the question is, how do we revive and rethink agriculture? Is it really so bad that it can't offer employment? And I'd like to sort of put in that educated youth don't want to be in agriculture because there's a certain idea of agriculture. We don't want to muddy our hands, it's poor in technology, the farms are so tiny, we get no profits, no surplus. All of it is true. But then you can have huge improvements in technology. There's plenty of evidence to say that if you have cell phones, the adoption of technology is much greater. This is in Indian randomized controlled trials. You have irrigation, you grow 3 months of vegetables and you sell in a local market, you're probably going to make enough than you would if you're in an urban context looking for a job, and so on. Now, what is the difficulty? And then you can talk about drones also. You take farmers in Europe, they actually have all agricultural degrees. You can't come in and become a farmer and get the subsidies that Europe offers unless you have an agricultural degree. So it's not like agriculture doesn't need people with skills. It does. So the question is, how do we upskill agriculture? And one of the things that's happening globally, which is completely hidden from sight, is that farmers are aggregating. Not at FPOs, but they're aggregating at the production level. You go to UK, you go to Canada, you go to France. Farmers are coming together because they're short of capital. They come together with other farmers, and they produce more, and they produce a surplus, and they market together. Now, is that possible in India? In fact, it is possible, and it's happening in India. I mean, I keep talking about the Kerala story, but it's a very big story. It's not a small story, which is like 73,000 group farms in Kerala. There are 500 group farms in Andhra. There are group farms in Eastern India. Are they working? In some of the cases, the youth are coming together and say, we'd much rather do this for 3 months than look for jobs in the cities. So I'm saying that you need technological improvement.
Right.
You need, let me complete.
Sure.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
Yeah, because you seem to be a bit in a hurry to move on. So that's one thing. Institutional change, technological change, and I think agriculture can become a potential, not just a failure in the way we're thinking about it. The third thing I wanted to mention, Santosh, is the issue of gender. Now, it's quite right that if you look at the data, the current data on the periodic labor force, the survey, PLFS, something like 42% you said are unpaid family workers, another 31% are non-account workers. Now, where are they? The unpaid family workers are largely in agriculture, the women. The own account could be vegetable vendors, could be all kinds of informal sector workers. They're all in the informal sector. So what is needed here? Why are we not talking about assets? Can a farmer cultivate if he has no land? But if she has no land, we don't talk about it. Can you be a good vegetable vendor by simply renting your cart? Nana is sitting next to me. She'll know all about it. Why is it we're not talking about assets? And I think there's a complete disconnect because we're constantly talking about wealth inequality and talking about women as if they are only labor. So we are fixated on labor force participation rate being low, but we should really be talking about livelihoods. And what makes for livelihoods is both capital and labor and ownership of capital. Yeah. So I really think that's part of the missing link. It's nowhere in your chapter, but hopefully next time you write. Assets.
Just picked it up.
Well, your index at least doesn't have either land or assets in it. And yes, I skimmed through it. But obviously I can't do justice to it. I can look at the figures again, but I believe that's the case because that's the way the conversation has been going, not just in India, but much more globally. So I would like some response on that.
Okay. Let me.
We got to vacate the hall in 10 minutes.
Okay, so we have to vacate the hall in 10 minutes. This is going to be the last question, and I'm going to get wrap-up comments if you would start by responding to what we just heard there from Bina, and then we'll close things up. Montek.
No, I think I agree with what she's saying, that in general, the gender aspect is not adequately played out. And I think lots of evidence, micro type of evidence, the cooperative for farming, self-help group, they seem to be more effective. You know, the main thing to remember about policies is that 2 areas where agriculture has done worse are the areas where MSP is operational. I mean, the growth rate of those is about 2%, whereas everywhere else is 6 or 8. 90% of our those who agitate for farmers, both civil society and economists and farmers, argue that assured pricing is really what farmers need. The evidence doesn't support that at all. I just want to add a little mischievous thought to irritate your audience. No, I agree with you. I wasn't responding to you. I accepted your point that there's lots there.
It's not about women.
Yes, I agree.
The point is, if you don't produce a surplus, how is MSP going to help you? It's not just a marketing issue. And the government has been talking about agriculture, mainly in terms of a marketing issue. Even the FPOs you're promoting are about marketing. What I'm
No.
suggesting is less about production. You look at the FPOs are basically marketing.
Okay, we're gonna,
I
we're
mean-
gonna,
Yeah, why are you saying no? Do you have evidence?
Milk and all the stuff on milk is more than marketing.
may I suggest
Okay.
we take this offline because we do have to vacate the hall as we've just been told in the next 5 minutes. But apologies if we couldn't take any more questions. I'm going to end by asking each one of you, and Santosh, I'll give you the last word. What are you most optimistic about? Since we've addressed all the stuff that we're concerned about, what are you most optimistic about? Let's leave on a happy note.
I think there's a lot more happening at the micro level when I look at a whole lot of studies. What is unfortunate, I think, is that, and this is true of better use of agriculture, practices, bringing in technology, also saving water and so on. Lots of very, very good micro level information. But regrettably, I don't find it scaling up into policy. I mean, this is just happening on the ground. But I've not seen anyone saying, this is what's happening. Therefore, this is how we're going to restructure. And I'll give you a very simple solution. If you want to be really drastic, take your entire your fertilizer budget and the subsidy on on free power, keeping food separate, although that could also be relevant. Pull it into one big bundle. Don't give it to the Ministry of Agriculture. Give it to the Ministry of Fertilizer. Give it to the Ministry of Agriculture and tell them that your job is to distribute it to the states on some basis, set up a finance commission or whatever it is, some reasonable basis, and tell the states, you use this money for agricultural development, you decide the programs, and we have a lot of suggestions, and if you invite us, we'll come and give it to you. And if you don't invite us, that's fine. You do it yourself. I mean, the amount of money that you'd be collecting is huge. But we want to carry on doing all that, but then think of topping it up with yet another scheme. And I don't think that makes sense.
Okay.
Yeah, let me just say one, that what makes me optimistic is a huge increase in education, even though it's a very varied quality. When you have a 30% gross enrollment ratio in tertiary education, pushing out 10 million graduates, we know the quality is. Look, so it's very different situation. The next 30 years, next 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, and they'll keep on increasing. These guys will do something, right? And or other way around, you have an opportunity to do much more. To give a very simple example, we need really huge activity in much better urban governance, all right? You know, you can, whether it's a sanitation, sewerage, everything, you can talk about urban transport and so on, that you could employ these educated youth. So there's one source of optimism. And yes, it will mean that because they're educated and if they're unemployed, they will agitate, which is terrific as far as I'm concerned. I always welcome agitations. You know, when I was an undergraduate at Yale, I also went on a strike for 6 weeks, but my grades fell because of that. So I think that's one. This huge increase in education, I think, is a reason for optimism about the future. One else on agriculture, I agree with much of what Veena said. That, you know, we have a lot of our agricultural policy has been based on a self-image of agriculture being cereals, which was true for a long time. Okay? As she's saying, much more is happening in non-cereals, all right? And that today the value added from cereals, all put together, is lower than just dairy. Okay? So there's huge potential, everything she talked about, that is whether it's fisheries, whether it's meat, poultry, everything else, food, vegetables, and so on. And that's reflected in the change in diets also. So I think that is somehow not yet crept into our policy thinking. You can improve productivity, overall productivity tremendously with this move, but my caveat there is it will not improve employment, because those are less employment intensive than the cereals. Yes, the employment they'll have will be much higher income level, which is terrific. So as people then go out, that you can improve agriculture, you improve agricultural growth rate, improve agricultural income, but you will have more people needing non-agricultural jobs, which is what Santosh has been talking about. So I'll just stop there.
Santosh?
Much of what Beena said, I agree with, and I have already discussed a large part of it in chapter 6 of the book, and before that, in another book published by Cambridge University Press 10 years ago called Seizing the Demographic Dividend. So I'll take this out bilateral with Beena. Let me assure you that I have broad agreement with you, and we can push that agenda forward together. But on your question on what is most hopeful, what is in fact most hopeful is precisely the thing that in a sense Beena and Rakesh were talking about. In the last 15 years, we've seen a phenomenal transformation in women's education. Believe it or not, we came too late, 50 years too late, I believe. It's only that we universalized elementary education in the 1990s. And the wonderful thing that happened in the noughties is that girls' enrollment increased very sharply, partly because of the hot cooked meal that was introduced first for first 5 years, then for the next 6, 7, 8 as well, and then of course the universalization between 2010 and 2015 of secondary education. It was 58% gross enrollment ratio at secondary level in 2010. In 5 years, we've gone to 85%, and that's not fallen. And the important thing is that all these girls and all these young people are moving up. Now, the final point, what leaves me hopeful is, if we don't create the non-farm jobs for the men, the women are not going to get the jobs. And they have to be non-farm jobs because these girls don't necessarily want to be in agriculture. There are many jobs in agriculture, Beena, that can happen. However, what should leave you hopeful is that while the dividend is ending in 2040, and we may well be in a situation, if we haven't been generating the number of jobs that we talk about in the book over the next 15 years, we will become old without becoming rich, not even get to the level that China has gotten to. However, if we want to extend that demographic dividend beyond 2040, the only hope is not the Hindi belt populations. Don't misunderstand, we've already taken that into account. The only hope is, in fact, raising female labor force participation. But the women will get the jobs only if the men are first getting the jobs. I'm sorry, that's the way life is.
Well, we will close on that optimistic note, and we do hope that we do see more participation of women across different sectors in the economy. It is a complex issue, but we didn't even address the issue of AI, which you did bring up in one of your slides. And as we've already started to see, there's been a significant decoupling of revenue as well as hiring. We're seeing that across sectors, particularly in the IT sector, but that's a matter for a whole other day and a whole other discussion. But thank you and congratulations again, Santosh, and thank you very much for bringing all of us together here this evening. It's been a long time, and it's great to see many old folks back together on the same platform. Thank you so much.
We need many more young folks.
We do need many more young folks to join in as well. But thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, big round of applause for Montek, Ahluwalia, Rakesh Mohan, and Santosh Mehrotra.